Well, good morning, and thank you for the very flattering introduction. And it's really a pleasure for me to come to Brazil. Fred Lito invited me to Brazil, I think about 12 or 13 years ago, to an ABED event, and it was much smaller than this event today. And so I congratulate all of you on really working this association. And as we just heard, the work is not done. I guess when I first came to Brazil, I was quite amazed at the restrictions against distance education. And from this overview, I see that there's still a few yet to go, but I'm confident that both the demand and the opportunity is here in Brazil as it is all over the world. So I need the clicker. So for my talk this morning, I'm going to talk about a little bit about values that drive me as a distance educator, and I'm sure drive everyone in this room. I'm going to talk a little bit about 3 generations of distance education pedagogy. And the reason I wanted to talk about the different kinds of distance education is because we're getting increasingly worried about quality and about what makes a quality distance education program or distance education course. And I'm going to argue that it really depends on what pedagogy is driving it, not what technology you use, but what the pedagogy, what is the basis and the grounds, and what are you trying to do with your distance education. And you'll find, I hope that you'll find at the end of this talk that you must have different kinds of distance education. There isn't just one size that is best for our students or is best for you as adult learners or as teachers. And then I'm going to talk about our latest book, which is also available from Athabasca University for free in English, talking about teaching the crowds and talking about the different organization models that allow us to teach online and at a distance. So, first of all, I almost always start by talking about the values that drive me as a distance educator, and I think we need to keep these in mind at all times when we're talking to students and we're developing our courses. First of all is that we can't be self-smug and think that we have good, high quality at the right cost, because we can always improve. We can always make them more cost-effective, more learning effective, and more time effective so that students can learn quicker. Everyone is pressed for time these days. And the second is that I think that the solution is to empower students, not to teach students, but to empower students to learn. And I think it's critically important that we realize that teaching is just half or is less than half of what education is about. It's mostly about learning. And finally, I think that as our numbers just showed here in Brazil, there's a huge demand for higher education. It's good for the students, it's good for the institutions, and it's good for the country, and maybe it's good for our globe to be able to work together and learn together. So it's a right. It shouldn't be just for the elites and just for the privileged people. One of the real challenges we have, though, is that the speed of change is happening so quickly that it's very difficult for us to know what we should be training our students for. Whether the kind of jobs that exist today are going to be existing into the future. And I think this is a new challenge for educators because we've always had a wealth of past experience to pass on to young people. But I don't think that exists anymore. I mean, we need the wisdom from the past, but we also have to have a visionary adaptation for the future. And even though we can't clearly define it, I think we're rapidly changing the expectations of our students and of teaching and learning. So this is just getting to be an old slide now, but it just shows you the volume of information, the number of uploads to Netflix and to YouTube and to Facebook. And you get the idea that there is such a tremendous amount of content, of interaction that's happening. And so as educators, our job is to filter that. Clay Shirky said there's no such thing as information overload. there's just a failure to filter properly, and filter by machines and filter by people. So I think that sometimes we feel like this burrow, that there's just too much content out there. And I think we have to, as educators, start realizing that our job is not to put more bags on the back of that cart for our students, but to allow them to, to filter the information and apply it where it's needed. 2008, I wrote an article where I talked about the relationship between technology and teaching and pedagogy. And some people, especially when we get talking education technology, we start to think that technology is the only thing that counts, that's the most important part. But on the other hand, you talk to some educators and they think, oh, it's only pedagogy. Technology is just a tool. And I don't think either of those approaches is correct, but rather it's like a dance where technology sets the beat and the timing, but pedagogy defines the moves. So where I'm going to end today talks about how we have to squish our learning into social forms or social boxes, whether they be students all alone, whether they be students working in groups, whether they be students in networks, or whether they be sets of students all around the world. And I think we need different pedagogies and different technologies to reach each of them. And sometimes we feel like we're just squishing ourselves and our students into the boxes of our institutions. And I think we have to learn what the boxes are and how best to shape our teaching and learning. So this is an article I wrote with John Drun a few years ago now, but it still has been resonating, at least with myself, talking about the 3 generations of online learning pedagogy. And I'll go through these briefly. I come from a part of Canada where the cowboys are, where there's lots of cattle raising, much like the ganchos here in South America. And one of the things about cowboys is they like things very simple. They like things straight ahead, no fancy talk. And so one of the ways that you can think about the first generation, behavioral cognitive pedagogy, is to think that the way a cowboy says it, that you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them, which may sound better in English than in Portuguese. But the idea is that our job as educators using this pedagogy is to be as clear as possible about the learning objectives, about the way students are supposed to learn, and to pass that on in direct instruction. And this pedagogy has driven, especially distance education, for years and years. It's the basis of our correspondence education. But in scholarly world or in universities, higher education, you can't get away talking like a cowboy. So then we started talking about the events of instruction. This is Robert Gagne, an American, who started instructional systems design. I'm sure if many of you have taken courses in distance education pedagogy, you'll be probably familiar with ISD, or instructional systems design. And he very clearly enunciated what a proper educational experience should be. And I'm not going to read these all out for you, but you first have to gain the learner's attention, and then you talk about the objectives that must be followed. You stimulate recall. The kind of things that you've probably, if you've been to an education program at a university in the last 15 or 20 years, you've probably learned this type of pedagogy. And it's very effective, especially for training. And as I'll show, it's also very effective at scale. You can get very large courses using this pedagogy. But behavioralism sort of fell out of favor as we started to realize that people are more than black boxes with stimuluses and responses. And the cognitive revolution came along. We started thinking about how much information can we chunk or into what size of a box, how much a cognitive load we were placing on the students, how we move things from working memory to long-term memory and back again. And then we started learning about multimedia and the effects of having graphics and video and overuse of media as well. And maybe most importantly, we started learning about variability, is that especially with this first generation, it can get very boring. No matter how clearly you tell somebody, if you just keep telling them, they get bored and they start losing their motivation and their attention. So, what were the technologies of this first generation? Well, this is a cartoon from 1920s from France, and it's not very complimentary to this technology, but you can see on the right, the professor is putting in the knowledge, the machine, the information, and it's being transmitted to the students' heads. And so the technologies were computer-assisted instruction, textbooks, lectures, television, video, and a number of new enhancements. And as you can see, this is a kind of a straightforward way of teaching and learning, is that our job as teachers using this pedagogy is to transmit what we know and the accumulated knowledge of our society and to transmit it to students so that they understand it. The social focus is just on the individual learner, and that's why, especially in the early days of distance education, it was independent study. It was students working alone at their own time and at their own pace. And there are some distinct advantages of working and learning alone. First of all, it maximizes freedom, so you don't have to wait for a class, you don't have to wait for the teacher. The learning happens when you're ready. The student is in control. It allows and promotes individualization, and it gets away from the freedom of groupthink, where people are all thinking the same things, saying the same things in order to get along with each other, even if they're incorrect. It powers autodidactism, and it sort of puts the student in control of the learning situation. And that's why at my own university, our undergraduate program, we have about 40,000 students, but we don't have a day that they start. They start whenever they want to start, and they can take up to 1 year to finish each course, or they can finish it in 2 months if they want. And so when you have a cognitive behavioral pedagogy, you can give that freedom to the students because it's mostly them working on their own. And as I say, there are some really strong lifelong learning advantages to train students to work on their own. If the only way that you can learn something is when a teacher tells you to, you're not equipped for lifelong learning. You have to take that control yourself and give that to your students. So what are some of the new developments? This is an old and our first generation of distance education pedagogy, but there's lots of new developments. And I think the most important one is open educational resources and open texts. We know from studies in North America that a significant number of students do not buy the textbooks. They cannot afford them. They choose courses that have low-priced textbooks. And who wins when we have a system like that? I think only the publishers, because I've written, I think, 10 books in distance education, and just last week I got a check for one of them for royalties, and it was $37. So I am not getting rich by producing textbooks. Very few people do. And the hardship that it costs students, I think, is a real crime, and there really isn't any reason for it. If our governments spent the money developing textbooks and paying teachers to develop high-quality textbooks, then we could give them away free, either in print or online, and it would save the governments a lot of money, and it would save students a lot of money. And so there's a global movement happening now for open educational resources, and you can see it isn't, there's Recursos Educación Abertos. Here in Brazil, there was a decree in 2000 and 10 saying that, you know, civil servants who produce educational content must license it for free use. So it's happening in Brazil, and it's happening all over the world. And we can see open OER commons or repositories, and there's a huge opportunity for us to reduce the cost of education by not paying publishers, but paying ourselves to write and create content that we put online. And it doesn't have to be full textbooks. It can be PowerPoint slideshows or anything that you've developed to help your students. You can share that with the rest of the world now, and I would certainly encourage you to do this. This is the license from that I just mentioned, 2011. Requires government-funded educational resources to be made widely available. So you can ask yourself, if you're developing distance education courses right now, how do you decide what textbook to use or what content? Do you just say, oh, well, the students will pay for that, or throw that cost onto the students? Or are you creative and think, I wonder if that resource is already available, if somebody else is using it? And the important thing about open educational resources is to make sure that they're licensed properly, so that under a Creative Commons license, which says, I keep the copyright still, but I allow you to use this content for educational purposes or even for commercial purposes if you wish. We're starting to see pushback from the students. This is from the United States, from Oregon, where they're saying, we're fed up with paying for textbooks, and we're demanding that our educational institutions start using educational resources and start using open textbooks instead of closed textbooks. And so what are the publishers doing? Well, they don't want to see their market go away. So this is a site in Canada, and what the publishers do is that they start looking around for open educational resources, and they say, buy our textbook, but at the same time, use all these free resources that you can get. And so this is a struggle. They're trying to keep their very lucrative business and at the same time add the open educational resources. So I think it's a challenge to not just, you know, enhance the commercial world of the publishers, but rather to replace it with a true open educational resource world. So but there are many challenges. There's few instructor incentives, at least in North America. It's the teacher assigns the textbook, which he gets for free, and it's the students who have to pay for it. The publishers are always talking about, oh, the quality isn't very good, and there's some copyright issues still here. But I think the biggest problem is just a lack of an open culture and practice. And I think we have to be always thinking about how can I reduce the cost of the educational that I deliver and develop. The second big development in this first generation is data mining and learning analytics. And you can see from this slide, you know, some of the questions that data analytics promises to answer is, you know, which students are at risk? Which are the students who haven't logged on? Which are the ones who are falling behind? And how can I make an intervention that will help them and improve their lot in life? Because oftentimes I find when I teach at a distance that I don't see the students, and it's very easy for students to get lost or to just not be around or to not participate. Whereas the promise of the online learning and analytics is that we will be able to see what's happening, and we'll be able to develop interventions to improve the attrition rate in all of our courses. And here's the Khan Academy. Probably many of you are familiar with the videos that the Khan Academy produces in many languages now to help students to learn. And they're starting to now add analytics so that students can track themselves going through a learning sequence, and again, at no cost to themselves. So big data or data analytics, there's three basic promises. And the first is that the technology will gather everything that's important about teachers and learning and student behavior. Then they analyze it. But it's the third one that is the biggest challenge. because there's a widespread belief that these large data sets are everything that we need to know about teaching and learning. And I don't think that's quite true. I think at the current state, data analytics gathers the easy stuff and not really the learning itself. So I think we should be very hopeful about data analytics, but I don't think we should, it won't replace the insights of a skilled teacher. So, to summarize, the first generation, it's scalable. You can go from tens to hundreds to millions of students, as they have in many countries in the world. There's few requirements or opportunities for social learning. It's focused on individual students alone, and it works, it's effective and efficient for many types of content and skill acquisition. So I think it's an important generation. It's something that all of our students need to experience. But I hope you'll agree that it falls short of the tremendous possibility of learning together in groups. And so this turns us to the social constructivist pedagogy of the second generation. And as I said, it's group-orientated. It's a membership, who's in the group, who's out of the group. It's not scalable. Most of the online learning that happens today is in groups of 30, 40 students. And so we went from having a system that went to hundreds of thousands of students to having to break down into small groups. It's a very familiar form of distance education because we can take the experience that students and teachers have had in a classroom and we can transport it to the distance. And there's focus on collaboration and shared purpose. And we have tool sets like Moodle or like many learning management systems that were designed specifically for this social constructivist pedagogy. As you can see, the number of students continues to grow very quickly using this pedagogy. It's learner-centered, and the knowledge is constructed and not transferred or transmitted. The first generation, remember, it was taking the knowledge and putting and giving it to the students. Now we help the students to construct their own understanding of whatever the content is that they are learning. There's a long history of research and study in this generation. This is the community of inquiry model that I developed many years ago with social presence and cognitive presence and teaching presence. And we have whole sets of tools to both research and to study and to use this pedagogy. As I said, it's group-orientated, so it's especially effective for collaborative learning and for the enjoyment that human beings get from talking, working, sharing, storytelling with each other. And all the way from the Chinese who say, is it not delightful to have friends coming from distant quarters and to meet together at a distance? And now we see that, you saw on the video from MIT, how groups can can expand to however many faces were in our video a few minutes ago. It wasn't thousands, but it was certainly 30 or 40 people from all around the world. The nice thing about social constructivism, it talks about social skills and having positive attitudes. It's not just learning alone, it's learning to work with other people. And so I think all of us, people don't get fired from or lose their jobs because they don't have content knowledge. It's usually because they don't get along with other people or they have personal challenges. So I think this generation is extremely important for the building this kind of social capital and the social needs that we have. There's lots of power in meeting in real time, which wasn't available to us until web conferencing and very sophisticated video conferencing systems became available. It gives immediacy, pacing, social modeling. and it's comfortable for students and teachers because that's what they experienced in the face-to-face classroom. So in my courses that I teach, we almost always have synchronous sessions using web conferencing. Maybe only 3 or 4 during a semester, but we try to get a chance for students to feel a part of a group. And if you think that student learning in face-to-face or sort of in web conferencing is a powerful and a quality way to learn, then what about going into Second Life or getting kind of an immersion experience? And I've tried to do this in my classes, and I'm not convinced that the challenges of Second Life and other virtual worlds really give you the benefit. But nonetheless, we're moving to an area where the distance is falling away from the social interactions that are critically important for this kind of pedagogy. We're starting to see all kinds of good tools to help students learn together, to work on projects together, to develop teams in collaborative and cooperative learning. We're starting to have pedagogical insights, ways to put learning to work. This is 100 activities that you can use at a distance in social activity, and it's an open educational resource that anybody can get and say, how do I actually teach using a social constructivist pedagogy? But the social form is, as I said, is groups, but they're limited in size, and you have to have a mutual awareness of the other students who are in that group. And there's one of the problems with this technology is it can become very teacher-dominated, so that, again, students are only learning to do what the teacher wants them to do. And so I think we have to build in social opportunities that aren't just focused on what the teacher wants, but rather how the students are learning themselves. So to sum up the second generation, it's not scalable. New group tools are coming along that increase the efficiency, and it's very helpful for making a transition from classrooms to online learning or distance learning, and it helps develop the critical communications, leadership, and decision-making skills. So my final generation is sort of the connective pedagogies, where we talk about this is a generation that was really born on the net. It depends on having the network or the internet to support the learning that is much more student-driven than the previous generation. So it's based on connectivism, which was developed by a colleague of mine from Athabasca, George Siemens. And he says Stephen Downes says, connectivism is the thesis that knowledge is distributed across a network of connections. And therefore, to learn means to develop a network of people, but a network of machines. So that's what the goal of this pedagogy is. It isn't to transmit information, and it isn't to develop a close, tight social working group, but it's rather to develop networks, student-centered networks that empower students to learn, to produce content, to share and connect with other people. So as George says, it's created by linking to appropriate people. It can be created and stored. Knowledge can be created and stored in non-human devices. So it says right up front, thinking isn't just in people's minds. It's also, it happens in machines. And it's connecting to those machines, to those resources, and to other human beings that makes a well-educated person. And it assumes the internet, and I know that the internet is not available to everyone all across the world. In fact, I think we have to pay for internet here in this room. So I think that's a challenge. But the other problem with the learning objectives of connectivist knowledge is that the teacher doesn't know what is going to happen at the end of the course, what kind of networks, what kind of connections the students are going to make. So this is from a blog I wrote a while ago where I talked about how to connectify your course. First of all, you have to make items that persist, that last. Why should what a student produces this year in the learning management system, why should it be destroyed and the student starts over building it again the next year? Rather, we should be working on things that persist from term to term and from year to year. It's based on accessibility so that students all around the world can contribute and can see and can develop a network with other students outside of the classroom as well as those who are in the same school, and the effects of networks. So it relies on Learning 2.0, which is all of these things about aggregation, networking, voting, all of the participatory technologies that have evolved in the last 10 years. But it's not learning in a bubble. It says that students shouldn't be isolated from the world. They should be interacting with the world while they're learning. And it celebrates what we call fuzzy boundaries. It's saying that we shouldn't have a closed wall between school or between the learning management system and the work or the family, but rather the way the internet is seeping into our personal lives, into our academic lives, into our intellectual lives. It's the same as teaching and learning. It should become a part of life and not a separate component. But unfortunately, connectivism can be very disruptive because as soon as you start opening the doors to all of this emergence and fuzziness, it gets real scary for some people. They think, oh, this is not it's not a world I've been comfortable in. And it's not just teachers who are uncomfortable, many students as well. They like Facebook for their friends, but when they talk about teaching and learning using tools like Facebook, they have a sense of, well, that's another part of life, but it isn't. All of our parts of life are connected together. And it gives new roles for teachers and students, and we have trouble with copyright. Who owns this content when it's moving all around the internet, and how do we enhance it and not exploit people, but rather give them credit, build upon the work of others? And it's too manic, it's a little too uncontrolled for a lot of people, especially if you look compared to the first generation where we tried to know exactly what path the students should follow to learn. In this connectivism, you don't define one path, you say there are many paths, and we help them to find those paths. And I'm just going to end by talking about the social aggregation makes a difference. This is a book that John Dran and I brought out a few months, or almost a year ago now, but it's called Teaching Crowds and Social Media. And I hope that you get a chance to download it. It isn't in Portuguese yet, but it is freely available. And I'm just going to briefly go through the three social aggregations that I think are important in education. And just a plug for Athabasca University Press, we already heard about it this morning, but this series now has 9 books and there are more coming along, and basically all of the books that we produce can be downloaded for free. So you're welcome to download any of them, including the one on the top right, Online Distance Education Research, which Olaf talked about yesterday, and we're going to be talking about tomorrow morning as well. So, the 3 generations, if you map them, the first generation, cognitive behaviorism, was about individuals. The second generation was about groups. And the third, the connectivism, is about networks and sets. And I know that you know about individual learning because I've just told you in cognitive behavior style. I have transmitted that knowledge to you, hopefully. And you know about groups. You know a little bit about networks because you're probably on Facebook or Learnus or some of the other groups. But I think you probably don't know too much about how to teach using sets, and so I'll focus on that one. So the third generation, its social forms of connectivism are networks and sets. As I said, you probably know all about social networks, LinkedIn, academia, both the public ones as well as the private ones. And but the sets is maybe more interesting because it talks about how do we talk or how do we teach all of the people who are interested in a particular topic. So it's an aggregation of all the people who share a particular interest or a commonality. And one of the biggest examples are some of the large-scale MOOCs that people take that enroll in a MOOC not to form a social group, but that what they're after is that they share a common interest in some particular topic. And so you have to, develop learning techniques that allow students to benefit, to share content, to upload, to comment upon others, but without the restrictions of a tight group ownership and control. So you can think of examples of sets, or the sets of all graduates of this university or that school, the set of all physics teachers, and one of the major activities of sets is to curate resources for each other, so that you have tools like even a tag cloud that allows you to take all kinds of information and find out what are the important things, so that the set of people who are interested in that can follow it and can learn from it. Again, they're not forming a social relationship with these other people. Or a Twitter hashtag where you're just following some particular topic, and you're learning a lot from that topic without being personally involved in it, but you're just becoming a part of it. But when the set gets energized, and when you feel energized, you can contribute to that set, to the knowledge of that set, and therefore benefit both yourself and other people in it. So the classic set activity is all the people who are editing a particular Wikipedia article. This can be people from all over the world who share an interest in one particular topic. And again, they're not forming a social relationship, but they can learn from each other by working on a common object or artifact, mainly a Wikipedia article. And there's a whole bunch of ways that you can use this: student response and polling systems, where we can ask the set to share their wisdom, to crowdsource knowledge and knowledge formation. Of course, MOOCs, the set of all people with a content interest, are increasing in popularity, at least in the numbers of them. The huge numbers that we saw at the beginning of the MOOC era have sort of gone down now to around 8,000 or 9,000 people on average, but there's a tremendous opportunity to learn at very low cost. We have specialized tools like Pinterest or Learnist or Google Collections that are designed to help the set of all people who are interested in whatever topic or every subject that you can think of. We have tools that start and help people to move down from a set of people to a group of people or a network of people, so that you can go in and out of a set. You're not sort of stuck there, but you can evolve in your teaching and your learning. So, to summarize this third generation, it's born on the net. It focuses on student responsibility for their own learning and building their own learning networks and sets. It builds critical networking and judgment skills, but it's emergent and it can be disruptive. And there's a question of, it hasn't been around long enough to just say, is it only for certain types of learners, or can all learners benefit from this kind of pedagogy? So I think that's a challenge for all of us, because we're all learners in a connectivist world, and so we have to become both learners and teachers to use this pedagogy. So I'll conclude by saying that the best part of online learning is it's eclectic. It allows different people to learn in different ways and different teachers to teach in different ways. But the real challenge is when we try to implement quality standards and say, this is high quality and this is not high quality. Because if you're talking about the quality standards for the first generation, they're not the same as for a third generation learning. So you have to be very careful that we know that we're intelligent about the way we judge quality when it comes to distance education or even classroom education. I think that we need to match the pedagogy, the technology, and the social forms so that they don't work against each other. But again, the goal is the empowerment of learning and smart, but not more work for teachers. We need ways for learners, the teachers, to work smarter, but not necessarily harder. So, to get to the theme of the question, if I was the Minister of Education in Brazil, well, the first thing I would do would be learn to speak Portuguese. But after that, I would say that every student should be exposed to at least one course with all of these 3 distance education pedagogies. They should learn from a cognitive behaviorist pedagogy, because you have to learn alone to be able to use open educational resources and to contribute to your own self-directed learning. We don't need dependence on teachers and on schools to drive us through the whole of our lives. We have to take control and ownership. And cognitive behaviorist pedagogy is really good for that kind of learning. But second of all, they should have a social constructivist learning experience. They should be able to form a group. They should be able to learn collaboratively and cooperatively with other students, and learn to, to share, to build social capital in small groups. And finally, they should have an experience, or more than one, to thrive amidst the very fuzzy boundaries and to gain the network skills and develop their own personal networks, so that they don't end up at their school experience, sort of really dependent on the group or the individual learning, but rather they have capacity to network with other students and other teachers and other learners around the world. So, obrigado, and I look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you very much.